Hello everyone, and welcome to the AE Tech Airsoft channel. If you like what you're watching, please like and subscribe to the video below. In this video, I'm going to show how to disassemble the VFC MP5 V2 GBB Bolt Carrier assembly. This process will apply to any of the V2 MP5 GBBs, including the MP5A5, the MP5K, MP5K PDW, or the MP5 SD. As usual, I'm going to start my video going over the tools we're going to use. So we're going to use some Super Lube multi-purpose synthetic grease. I've got my trusty hardened steel 90-degree pick. We're going to need a set of needle nose pliers, a 1/16 inch or 1.5 millimeter punch, a 2.5 and 2 millimeter Allen key. And we're going to use these to help disassemble the nozzle as well. So let's get into it. Okay guys, so to start the disassembly process, you're going to first need to field strip your bolt carrier assembly out of your MP5. I've already done that, and I've actually removed the recoil rod assembly. You absolutely do not need to remove this in order to take apart the bolt carrier. I just did it here for convenience and make the videoing a little bit easier. So once you've got your bolt carrier assembly out, the first step is going to be to remove this rear cap. And at the factory, it's installed with a spanner wrench, but we don't have that, so we're going to use some needle nose pliers. And we're just going to insert those into the back of the cap, and then we're just going to spin this out. Mine might be a little tight because I've taken this apart a few times, but there we go. It should break loose fairly easily. And there we go. We've got the cap removed from the back of the bolt carrier. We can now take the O-ring off this cap and inspect it for damage or wear. This O-ring can easily get damaged during disassembly and reassembly, so I normally recommend replacing this. Okay guys, so now that we have the back cap removed, we're going to go ahead and take the nozzle out. So if I pull the nozzle all the way forward like this, you'll notice that there's a gap between the back of the nozzle and the bolt carrier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take my 3 millimeter Allen key, and I'm going to make sure I have this pulled all the way forward. I'm just going to rotate the key until I can stick it in here. And what that's going to do is it's going to hold the nozzle forward so that we can push this pin out, which actually holds the two nozzle halves together. So now that key's in place, we can take our punch, line it up, and I'm just going to tap it out. A couple more taps. And there you go. We can see the pin came out. And once that's done, I'm just going to hold the nozzle and remove this Allen key and slowly let it back. And now that the pin's out, we're going to go on the next step and show how to separate the nozzle halves. Okay guys, so now we're going to separate the nozzle. So I've got my 2 millimeter Allen key, and what I'm going to do with this is it is just small enough to actually fit in this gap between the nozzle and bolt carrier here. And that's going to let me push against the back of the nozzle, and we're going to push it completely out the back here. So I'm just going to start pushing on the Allen key. And it might take a little bit of force. You might have heard it just click. As soon as I hear that, I'm going to switch to the other side. And I'm going to push some more. And you kind of just want to keep alternating. There we go. So now you can see the back of the nozzle came out. This one was quite stuck in there, but we've got it removed. Set that aside. And now that that's out, we can easily slide the front portion of the nozzle out. Inside here we have our rocket valve and spring, which should just come out like that. And then we also have our nozzle spring in here as well. So that is the now completely disassembled bolt carrier assembly. Okay guys, so now that we've got the complete bolt carrier group assembly apart and the nozzle apart, you'll be able to either do your maintenance or install your new rocket valve into the nozzle, whichever task that you're working on here. I have a few things I want to point out. The O-rings in this assembly can be a little bit delicate. Particularly, I found that the O-ring on this end cap can easily get damaged during the installation. It's a very thin cross-section O-ring. It's only 1 millimeter, and it's also very large. And the way it spins into the bolt carrier when you thread in the end cap here provides an opportunity for that O-ring to get sliced on some of the corners of the bolt carrier. So you want to be really careful when you reassemble this. These O-rings are extremely cheap. I'm going to post a link in the video description, but I would highly recommend just going to the O-ring store and buying 20, 30 of these just to have on hand. They're a few pennies a piece. Really a cheap spare part to just have on hand. And personally, whenever I take this apart, I don't even usually reuse this O-ring. I just throw it away and put a fresh one on because it's so cheap, and then I'll know my O-ring's always going to be in good shape. While you're at it, while you're at the O-ring store buying some, I would purchase some spares of the back nozzle O-ring, both of them. So there's a small one here that seals against the forward nozzle portion, and then there's this larger one in the rear. So you can remove this O-ring pretty easily. I like to use my favorite tool here, the pick. So if I just kind of like squeeze the O-ring with my fingers, you can see it makes it kind of pooch up a little, and then you can very gently get the pick underneath and you can just peel it right off quite easily. There we go, we've got it off the rear nozzle. And a similar concept can be applied for the small one. This small guy is a little bit harder to get off. The only thing I'd caution you on is be very careful if you're using a sharp pointed tool like this. If you scratch the O-ring groove, particularly on this lower one, you can also cause a leak to happen when you're firing your gun, and that'll lead to loss efficiency on your replica. And I would recommend picking up spares of all these O-rings. They're cheap, and keeping them in good shape is going to keep your replica performing perfectly. Okay, so before we start reassembling the bolt carrier and nozzle assembly here, the first thing we want to do is make sure we clean up all the old grease off these parts. So I'm going to take my microfiber towel here, and I'm just going to wipe all this old grease off and just try and get the parts cleaned up and ready as best you can. You just want to make sure you're getting any of the old grime or dirt or any BB particles or any other bits and pieces that might have floated its way onto the nozzle or inside the bolt carrier group here, because any of those can lead to leakage or other performance related issues. So when you have this apart, it's a great opportunity to just clean everything out and apply some fresh grease. So we got that wiped out pretty good. Let's just wipe the cap here quickly, and then we're going to do inside this bolt carrier. You can also take some Q-tips. Got a few over here, and we can go inside and really try and clean out the inside bore here of any old residual grease. I'm going to go around a couple times. You can see I'm getting some black from some debris that's in there. And again, you just want to kind of clean these out, get any debris out of the assembly you can. I'll wipe a little bit more here. I might wipe this just down a little bit more off camera just to try and get the bottom of this. But you want to make sure you just clean up all the parts before we go ahead and start the reassembly process here. So go ahead and get these wiped up and we'll continue on. Okay, so I've got all my parts pretty much wiped up where I want them to be. So to start reassembly, I'm going to put my O-ring back on that we took off earlier. And then we're going to apply some fresh grease. So I've got my super lube here. I'm going to take one of my Q-tips that I've broken in half, just to use as a little applicator. I'm going to take just a little bit of grease. We're going to wipe it on the O-ring here just like this, and then spread it around with our fingers. And you want to just get a really thin, nice coating on these O-rings. This is going to help it slide inside of the bolt carrier when we get it back together. So I'm going to put that aside, and we're going to do the same thing to the inside of the bolt carrier. So again, that's probably too much grease. We'll need a little bit. And I'm just going to smear that around on the inside bore here. So I just applied it here, and I can reach out my pinky and just kind of spread it around inside the bolt carrier so that it's all coated with a nice thin layer. So there we go, I've got a nice thin layer kind of uniformly applied around inside that bore. I'll throw this away. And then finally, we can reassemble our large O-ring back onto our cap. Again, normally I would put a fresh, brand new O-ring on here for this, but I'm going to reuse this guy. And we'll apply just a tiny bit more grease here. This needs just a tiny bit. This one you definitely want to make sure you've got some grease or silicone oil on, because this needs all the help it can get during reassembly. So there we go. We've got a nice thin layer applied. In the next part of the video, we'll start reassembling the parts into the bolt carrier. Okay guys, so to start reassembly, it's going to go in the exact reverse order of what we did to take it apart. So the first thing we're going to do is take our spring and we're going to drop it down into the nozzle. And you want to make sure, I'm capturing this on camera, that the spring goes all the way down to that bottom pocket. Next, we're going to take our rocket valve and we're going to drop that down just like so. And again, we want to make sure that that's all the way down that pocket, and you can see that it is in this case. So now that we've got our nozzle subassembly together, we can take our spring and we're going to lay that inside of its groove in the bolt carrier, which is located on this side. So if you look closely, there's a little stop. Let's see if I can get it on camera here, right in front of my finger there. And that's where one end of the spring sits. So we're just going to load this in here like so. And next I'm going to take the nozzle and gently sort of slide it into position. Now, if you notice, there's a groove, an opening cut in the nozzle right here. You want to make sure we line that up with the spring rest right there. So I'm going to line that up like so and just start sliding it into position. Now my left hand, I've got my finger in the board. I'm just holding that spring gently just so it doesn't move while I do this, because I want to make sure the spring stays all the way forward. So I'm just going to keep sliding, and I can tell, okay, now we've got that nozzle all the way back. And if we look in the back here, you can see where the spring is. It's sitting basically flush with the side of the nozzle, which is exactly where we want it. So now that we've got that part done, the next bit is going to be to install the rear nozzle half. And this is the tricky part. So if we look at our rear nozzle, you'll notice there's I'll put this down, you'll notice there's a boss sticking out of it right here. And that boss or pin, we want the spring to fit over when we install this. And it's a little bit, I'm trying to drop my nozzle here, it's a little bit tricky to line it up. So what I like to do is I can see my springs over here at sort of the 9 o'clock position. So I'm going to try and eyeball line up the back of this nozzle with that. So if we start to line it up and I get the rear nozzle started, just like this. One other thing you can use to try and help you line this up as you're pushing it down, if you look at the back of the nozzle, you can see there's this pocket that's sort of eccentric. It's a little bit off center here, and that basically needs to be in the 6 o'clock position. And if it's in the 6 o'clock position, when you go to slide this down, it should line up with the spring perfectly. So I'm going to just start feeding this down a little bit, and you want to go slow. It's very easy to, if you don't have this aligned, to damage the spring. So I'm just going to push it forward a little bit at a clip. Okay, so if you notice there, I just sort of carefully pushed it forward, and if I look, I can see my spring is fully installed and my two nozzle halves are back together. So again, if you push this or put this front nozzle in the way I showed with the spring, it holds the spring perfectly aligned, so that when you go to install the rear half of the nozzle, as long as this is lined up with this eccentric hole at 6 o'clock, if you push it straight down and in, your spring should go right over that boss and you should get a perfect reassembly. Now it's very tempting right now to push this forward and let it snap back. But if you do that, your two nozzle halves may separate and you can damage your spring that way. So avoid that temptation. And instead, what we're going to do next is reinstall the pin, which I'll show in the next video segment. Okay guys, so to reinstall the pin, I'm going to pick up my bolt carrier and I'm going to push the nozzle forward. And once again, we're going to use our 3mm Allen key. I'm going to reinsert it into the back of the nozzle just to help me out here. And then we're going to take our pin. And if I look through the nozzle here, see if I can get it right on camera, you can see the hole. So I can tell that both the front and back are lined up now because I can see cleanly through. And I'm going to take my pin and just get it started there. And then what I like to do, actually usually with my needle nose pliers here, I'm able to gently push the pin back into place. So I get it started. There you go. I can see I just got it snapped down most of the way. And now I can kind of finish it. There we go. And you just want to make sure that that pin is flush and fully seated. And it feels like mine is. So now I can remove this Allen key and safely let it snap back. And we got a nice snap there. So this nozzle's retracting really good. So that's a good sign that we've done everything correct so far. So the last step will be to reinstall this cap, which I will show in our final video segment here coming up. Okay, so the last step to reassemble is installing this cap. And I've mentioned it a couple times in this video, but this step you want to be careful because it's very easy to damage, once again, this O-ring. So I've already got this lubed up from earlier, so I'm just going to gently start the cap into the bolt carrier like this. And I'm watching the O-ring, I'm looking at it all the way around to make sure that it hasn't moved or twisted. And it looks like we're in okay shape. So once you've got it most of the way installed, I like to grab it with my pliers and you want to be gentle here and just twist a little bit and kind of work the cap down to the threads. And I actually like to turn it backwards first just to get the threads sort of lined up, and then we can start twisting it into position just like this. So now I'm starting to actually tighten it down, and you want to watch this spot right here as you're tightening it. We don't want that O-ring to pop out. So we can. And that's it. Okay guys, so thanks again for watching our video, and if you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you.